Hey folks, this week Rob Campbell and Ben Meadors join me, and we talk about open source at Microsoft, open source at Redis, Copilot and AI, and a little bit of reminiscing from our college years, believe it or not. It's a lot of fun though, and you don't want to miss it. This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 834, recorded Tuesday, May 27th. It was cool in 2006. It's time for FLOSS Weekly. That's the show about free, libre, and open source software. I'm your host, Jonathan Bennett, and today we are going to talk about Microsoft, actually, and maybe Redis, and maybe some other things happening in the news, because our guest had to postpone to the next week at the last minute, which that's all right, we understand. So I've got a pair of lovely and talented co-hosts. I've got Mr. Ben Meadors and Mr. Rob Campbell. Welcome, guys, to the show.
Hello, hello. Howdy, good to be here.
I appreciate both of you stepping in. Ben stepping in at the last minute and Rob stepping in. Well, I think it was yesterday I asked you to do it. So we are kind of last minute here, but that's all right. We'll make it work. There's an interesting thing that happened in the news this week, and I've got a pair of, well, can I call you guys Microsoft fanboys? Is that fair?
Microsoft apologists.
Yeah. It's a little stretch, but I don't dislike Microsoft. I don't hate Microsoft like a lot of open source people do.
I have warmed to Microsoft in the past few years. I remember it was not that many years ago that, you know, they bought a couple of things that I was into at the time. Well, they bought Minecraft, which I used to be more into, and they also bought GitHub, which we were all into. And that was a time. That was a time. I was not a fan of either of those. The sky was falling in both cases, and they've done a fairly decent job of managing it and not being evil with either of those. And so they've won some brownie points. I can take Microsoft a little bit more seriously now when they put out statements like Microsoft hearts Linux and all of those things. I still want to know if Microsoft still makes a significant amount of money on Android devices because of the patents that they hold. That was the thing for the longest time. But so Rob has a story. We actually covered this in the Untitled Linux show just this week. But Rob has a story about something else that Microsoft has done that really sort of impressed me. So we're going to let Rob take it away here for just a minute. And then we're going to chat about the new and improved Microsoft.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, traditionally, Microsoft and FLOSS isn't what people used to put together, at least not on friendly terms. But for at least the last decade, they've at least been proclaiming that they love Linux and love open source. And even just this week or last week, I guess they did even more to prove it. They keep proving it, with things, I think. But last week they created a new text editor called Edit. It's still in development. It's not ready for use, but for Linux Unix users, think Nano or Vim. And so that's a new open source option. It's not GUI. It's not like you normally think of Windows. It's text based. So they open sourced that last week, which that's cool. And another thing, WSL, Linux users either love it because they can run Linux distros right inside on Windows, or they hate it because they think that it's going to take away from Linux, take over Linux, take Linux users away from actual bare metal Linux. But I don't know if that's came true yet. I think it's mostly maybe brought users into Linux who maybe wouldn't have been to it. I don't know. I don't really know the data on that. But what they have done this week with WSL or last week I should say, is they have now made that open source. And what's kind of fun about that, way back in 2016, a little over 9 years ago, April 2016, I think it was, April 6th or something like that, after it got put on GitHub, the very first issue request on there was from a guy. What I got his name here? I don't know his name, but his request was to make, hoping that Bash for Windows, which is what I think it was called then, hoping that it could become open sourced. And at the time, the response was, they have no plans for this at the time, but they are open to the idea of open sourcing some bits of that technology. So 9 years later, they were able to close a 9-year-old issue request on GitHub. And even this week I talked about there's 62,000 lines of code that they put in the Mesa, and they just keep doing a lot of open source stuff. And it's are they contributing for themselves? Are they doing it because they love open source? Do they love open source for money? I don't know, but they have been doing a lot in the open source world over the last decade.
Yeah, so I went and pulled up. We'll put the thread in the show notes. It's great. It is WSL issue number 1, and it was from back in the time when it was Bash on Windows. That's what they were calling it. And Siranath asks, he says, hopefully Bash on Windows will be open source back in 2016. And yeah, it's great because you come
can see why they changed the title.
Yeah, it's
don't bash on Windows.
Well, that too. That too.
I don't know why I didn't think of that one.
It's going to be dangerous to have you two together.
I could have had so much fun with that.
You guys are supposed to be defending them.
Oh. I was thinking of the puns. You're both going to be pun masters.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, the comments on this now are great. So it's like 9 years later, Microsoft takes a page out of Valve's book, Microsoft Time. It's great. It's great. So there's one thing that really comes to my mind when I think about this, and that's, Rob, you mentioned this idea of, well, we don't know why Microsoft is doing this. Like, are they doing it out of the goodness of their heart, or is it for a business advantage? And I kind of call bogus on that question, because I don't even know if anybody should do open source out of the goodness of their heart. You do open source because it makes sense. You do open source because you want the code to be out there so that people can work on it. You want to, I kind of, years and years ago, when I first came onto the idea of open source, the people that I was with, I started trying to evangelize it. And some of them were like, isn't that kind of a communist Marxist idea? Right? Like, open source, you think about it. And it took me a while to figure out why it's not. And of course, I'm sure some people are going to tell me, yes, it is. It took me a little while to figure out why it's not. And one of the big reasons is that you release your code open source voluntarily, right? And you do it because it makes sense for what you're doing, not because somebody's telling you that you have to do it. And so I have zero problem with the idea that Microsoft is releasing code as open source because it makes sense for their business. I would say that's why every business should release code as open source.
Well, it's kind of like the old philosophy question, if you do something altruistic, it makes you feel good. So are you doing it because it makes you feel good? Or are you doing it because, is it still altruistic if you're doing it because it makes you feel good, I guess?
Yes. I had that. I had that in mind. There is no such thing. Humans are incapable of true altruism. But you've got a lot of Microsoft stuff going on that's open source, like the whole .NET thing. I mean, that's what Ben here works with day in and day out. And Fedora server, I can go my Fedora machine. I can just do a DNF install .NET, and that's kind of my threshold for, is this thing truly open source? If I can just do it in Fedora and it works.
I think a number of the things that Microsoft has done in terms of open source work have also not entirely been without benefit to some of their like Azure cloud computing services. Like a lot of that tooling kind of serves that bigger cloud business model.
Yeah, well, so I mean, Windows Server basically doesn't exist outside of the on-premise to run your Active Directory, right? Is there anybody running Windows servers in the cloud to be able to do cloud off of it? Is that a thing anywhere?
I've definitely seen some like hybrid installations where you have like a nano server as like as a container VM host on a cloud cloud basically on premises a style of hosting where you lease, server space on a cloud platform, and then you're running a whole host of VMs. But that's a little bit of that's not a traditional cloud story. That's like we're not quite ready to turn over the keys story.
Yeah. I've seen Windows servers in like Azure running for the purpose of application servers, stuff like that.
It's definitely not the majority, though.
No, I mean, there are people who had application service on premise, and they wanted to be in the cloud, and they wanted that application in the cloud. I think I've seen that with, I've seen people do that with, I think I've seen people do it with even like QuickBooks, which even though they have their cloud offering.
Yeah, some of the older legacy systems too that you can't, you don't want to maintain your infrastructure on premises, but you still need to run like an old GIS server or something. I've seen some of that, definitely.
Yeah, it's just my thought process is thinking about why Microsoft is doing this. So much of Azure, it's funny, Microsoft's cloud, so much of it is running installs of Linux, like the vast majority, from what I understand. And you think about the big services. Nobody's building AWS on top of Windows servers, right? You're not getting served Netflix videos from Windows servers. It's just not the way the web is being built.
Yeah, I mean, it surprises me some days the things I do see running on-premise Windows servers when it seems like it would be so much more, I don't know, easier to run it on a Linux server. Like a basic FTP server is all it is. Why do you have a whole Windows install and whatever version of FTP server running on there? It seems kind of overkill to me. But yeah, a lot of things, if you had that in the cloud, makes more sense to me to be Linux. But
yeah. It is interesting. Something I've noticed is in small towns, like, Rob and I are kind of in small town America. I think both of us are. And you talk to your IT guys around here, and the vast majority of them, they are way more familiar with running Windows and Windows Server than they are with something like a Linux server or BSD server. And then you get out into the hot spots where people are doing a lot of cloud work, and everybody there knows how to admin a Linux box. It's an interesting dichotomy to see.
Yeah, around here I mostly see a few people here and there who might kind of dabble in it as a hobby, or they did it a little bit in college, and otherwise they don't know much about it or have a lot of experience.
I experimented with it in college. Boy, that could be true. That's several things fit that. It seems like that'll be a great show title. So there is another, and I'm going to try to draw a connection between these two, and we'll see how successful we are with it. But there was another story that really sort of piqued my interest from this week, and that's Redis. And Redis, the database, one of these companies that went with a source available license back a couple of years ago. And they then wrote their server-side license, which, again, was one of these kind of, what do they call, business source style license, which basically says, hey, we're going to make the source available, but if your name is Google or Amazon, you're not allowed to use it. This is essentially what they came out and said. I mean, I don't remember if they named those two companies, but that's what it was. That's what it was for. And saw an article that apparently they were hoping that this license would get picked up and become an OSI approved license, and just it wasn't going to happen. It wasn't ever going to happen. And so they finally came back and said, okay, fine, we will make Redis available under the AGPL, the Affero GPL, which I thought was really interesting, because one of the reasons I thought this was so interesting is because that's what I said when news first broke that they were doing their dumb custom license. It's like, the AGPL already exists, guys. Now, I'm curious, do you guys know, I think Rob does because we talked about it. Ben, do you know what the AGPL is?
No, I don't have any experience with that particular license. I've heard it name dropped, but I don't know the terms of it.
Yeah. Rob, do you remember the AGPL?
I mean, not any more than it, not any of the details besides it being an open source, fairly free license. I don't really know what makes it a GPL different from like GPL, I guess.
Do you guys know what the GPL loophole is?
I don't.
The GPL loophole is that okay, so the GPL says that when you give somebody a binary, you have to also offer to them the source code that goes with it. And so, if I say, here's my exe, put it on the internet, and somebody says, I would like, and it's released under the GPL, someone can go back to you and say, I would like the source code that goes along with that. And under the GPL, you have a requirement to send them the source code. And the GPL, interestingly, even says that you can charge a little bit of money for it. It has to be a reasonable amount of money, like the cost of the CD that you're going to mail it to them on. Right? Like the GPL was written before the internet was really the thing that it is now. So there's some weird stuff in there. But that's the GPL in a nutshell. There's a little more to it, but that is as far as what we're talking about right now, that is the thing that you have to do. If you distribute a binary, then you have to make the code available. What happens when the binary is running on your own server? And so, you go to Google.com and you go to Gmail and you interact with the Gmail web portal. There's a lot of code that runs behind that, and some of it is GPL. But if you write an email to Google and say, I would like the source code behind gmail.com, Google will very politely write back to you and tell you to pound sand, because there is no way that they're going to give you the crown jewels of all of that source code. It's probably also ugly, and they wouldn't want you to look at it, but that's kind of beside the point. That is the GPL loophole. If it is running on the server, if it's running in the cloud, the GPL doesn't have any teeth. And so the AGPL was the response to that. It's let's close the loophole. So the AGPL says, not if you have the binary, but if you interact with the service, you then have the right to request the source code. And as a result, Google and Amazon and a whole bunch of other companies have very strict rules that their employees are not to mess with AGPL code at all. Because you talk about the GPL being viral. Oh, the AGPL is on purpose is extremely viral, especially for a cloud provider like that. So, all that said, I said way back a long time ago, Redis, what are you doing? Just make it AGPL and then offer to dual license it as GPL or whatever when somebody wants to pay you money for it. And they finally did it.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Even me I just have a few handfuls of tiny websites that I don't think anyone is going to come asking for my source code, but I have open source code running in the back end, and if I were to modify it, it's not going to be pretty code because, well, it's just for me. and boy, I'd hate for someone to bug me and say, give me the source code, and I'd have to do it. I mean, it's fine. I wouldn't have a problem. It's just the work involved. I don't know, that seems like a perfect fit for Redis to do. I mean, they Google and them, if they're gonna take it, they're gonna have to be held liable to share whatever they do with it.
Yeah, it seems like the result here probably is going to be Google and all these companies are just going to take the version before the relicense, right, and fork it and then maintain their own private forks. At least that's what I would do. Yeah,
and I think that's what they did back, a year and a half ago or whenever exactly it was that Redis initially did their relicense. What this really gains for Redis, though, is it is once again available under an open source license, and so the community of, say, purists, which I'm halfway in that community, it gets the bee out from underneath our bonnet, as it were. And I think there are probably some businesses and shops out there that would be willing to use it under the AGPL that might not have been willing to use it under the non-open source license. But I think the biggest win is probably for the purists, those that say, it's not open source anymore. Well, no, here it is. It is once again.
And it's about the same result as their whatever complicated licensing they had for a while there. It didn't stop Google and whoever else, Microsoft or whatever, from using it. They just forked it before the license changed and maintained their own, or someone else forked it.
Yes, yeah. It's got to be complicated in a situation like that though, because like you can't pull any of their fixes in when the stuff released under the new license. I guess the way that works is you just go look at the CVEs and don't look at any of the fixing source code and re-implement it. Man, the engineering on that.
Yeah. And then if you do happen to come up with the same solution, how do you prove that?
Yeah, I would think a lot of it too comes down to just trying to keep up with the API changes. Because if I'm a cloud vendor, I'm thinking about, well, what happens when these guys change their protocol? Like I know Azure, for instance, has, I think it's under the Cosmos DB. They implement MongoDB, the API for querying objects, and I've often kind of wondered what's under the hood of that thing. You know, is there a Mongo database somewhere underneath all of that mess, or have they like reverse engineered their own little NoSQL that's optimized for the Azure cloud? But I have to wonder if some of these companies, you know, keeping up with that, with the API level changes, I mean, that kind of becomes a little bit of a maintenance nightmare if you want to stay up to date and not get kind of stagnated on whatever legacy protocol that Redis would acquire. On their fork.
And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like if you're offering this as a hosted version, you've got to keep that up to date. But because you're not allowed to look at the code, you got to reverse engineer everything, right? Like it's quite the burden to keep up with.
Well, what was the lawsuit? That was Java that had something with API, was it?
That was the big Android. Yeah, that was the big Android lawsuit. When Google created, well, I don't even think it was Google at the time, but when Android was created, they decided that Java was going to be the language for writing Android apps. And Sun, was it Sun at the time probably, and then it became Oracle. Anyway, there was the huge fight over whether you could just re-implement the Java API. And the judge that originally decided that case was a great judge and like actually knew a little bit about programming and learned about programming Java while doing the case and came up with really a reasonable ruling. And I think didn't it get overturned on appeal and Google ended up having to pay out of the nose for that?
I thought it did. The Google AI response is telling me that they won in April 2021 for fair use, but I don't know if I thought I remembered something after they won, but I don't know, maybe.
Google LLC versus Oracle America Inc., a landmark U.S. Supreme Court decision related to the nature of computer code and copyright law. Google petitioned the Supreme Court in 2019, focused on the copyrightability of APIs. Case was delayed because the world went crazy over COVID. In April 2021, the Supreme Court ruled in a 6-2 decision that Google's use of the Java APIs served an organizing function and fell within the 4 factors of fair use, bypassing the question on the copyrightability of the APIs. So they opted not to rule on whether APIs are copyrightable, but they said that this particular case, it was fair use.
So it's open to be litigated again in the future, but
gotta love it. Although there's at least some case law that suggests that this sort of thing would be fair use. Yeah, interesting. So let's see. I was chasing down another rabbit hole before we got there. There's some other interesting things that Microsoft has been up to with their WSL that we could talk about a little bit. They're trying to get the graphical side of it working, or they have it working, I guess, and they're trying to get it to work better. I've played with WSL. I've never tried to run like a X11 through it or any of those things, and I know you can get really fancy with that.
You can. I have ran, I think, Firefox. No reason for that, but just to test if it works. So you can run graphical applications in WSL, no problem at all. WSL 2, I think, 2.0 or 2.
It's the one that's got all the fun extra stuff.
But what I would love to see is a full like KDE or GNOME desktop environment running through there.
Okay, it used to be possible many years ago to run KDE as your Windows desktop environment. Do you guys remember this at all? It didn't last for very long. Like they pretty quickly realized that it was a terrible idea. But I remember, this is probably 15 years ago now, something like that. But apparently there was a KDE application manager for Windows, and you could go in and tell it to install applications. And from what I understand, there for a little while, it was possible to like install the entire Plasma desktop. This would have been like KDE 4 days. And like I said, they quickly realized that it was a terrible idea and nobody wanted to do it, and they shouldn't have done it, and they felt bad about it. But there for a little while, it was a thing.
I would have totally ran that on every Windows. I have run other shells on Windows before. I don't think any of them. I'm looking up now. I've ran the Cairo shell. That's CAIRO shell. It says it's still active, and well, it still supports all the way up through 11. So that's still a thing. I've ran that one, but even before that, one that's been discontinued that I used to like to run on Windows was Emerge Desktop. I wanted to run anything but the the Windows shell. I would love to have ran KDE on there, and even today with like WSL, back on that topic, I know I found directions out there, complicated ones to get KDE running, and I gave up, but I tried a little bit. But you can run other shells. I brought up there's a wiki page. Well, there's only like two, I guess, that are actually active: the Cairo shell and Open Shell. Otherwise, there's been a bunch that you could like. Well, Black Box, I guess, still supports 11, and Bump Top, Calamiris, and a whole bunch of stuff. LXD, you could run LXD, I guess, LXDE on XP, but I guess it stopped supporting anything after that. Lightstep, you could run up to Windows 10, but not Windows 11. So, I mean, if you do want, if you're running Windows and you want to pretend like you're not, there are other shells you can install. And from experience, I've used the Cairo shell.
Yeah, I found it. So it was, let's see if there's a date on this. It was KDE 4. Yeah, the KDE for Windows installer. It was a thing for a little while. The domain windows.kde.org doesn't exist anymore. But it was a thing for a little while. Oh, that's so much fun. That's quite the memory.
Could you get that installed and upgrade it? Probably not.
I think you'd have to do it on a VM. I don't think it would work on modern Windows. So you would have to, Wayback Machine it and download the binaries and get it on a VM. But yeah, the guy that wrote one of these articles has even got a little screenshot of going all the way Plasma on your desktop. And it's like, it's pretty, but it's not very functional.
Oh, so it wasn't very functional either.
No, not really. I think you had to run it on Windows XP, and like this would be a quite the thing to do to be able to go back and do it. But it'd be fun. I want to see screenshots of this for somebody.
What do we think the play is for the edit, the command line editing utility? Because I'm sitting here looking at this, hey, we open source this thing, which I completely missed my newsfeed that it was even an existing project. Like, you open source what? But I was curious to see what you guys thought of that particular project, and if there's like maybe a greater play for Microsoft to do sort of maybe be a full SSH host or something of that nature in the future.
I don't know what their thinking would be exactly. I know from my time being a managed service provider and managing a lot of computers, for IT, that quite often how I would manage them is there's various tools we have where I would go in on the back end and I would be on the shell, either the command line or PowerShell or whatever, and I would do stuff on there so that way I don't interrupt the actual user. And that would be one use case for a text editor, except that on the other hand, most Windows applications, you're not editing a config file. So once you have a text editor, I don't know what kind of use cases you have, but I mean, I guess there are.
I know
things.
Windows. I know Microsoft is keen on PowerShell being a thing, and I've not been terribly impressed with it most of the time. There are some neat tricks it can do, but I'm pretty sure you can set a Windows box up to be able to SSH into PowerShell already.
Yeah, I think they call it enter PS session or something like that. It's all like just like PowerShell, everything is command verb or something.
Yeah.
That kind of syntax. It certainly is powerful. I was, when I see something like edit, my mind goes to like, oh, they made Nano or whatever the Linux equivalent is, and I think about how I use Nano, and it's like, well, it's because I'm SSHing into this Raspberry Pi, and I need to like edit a YAML file.
Yeah,
like, that's the only time I'm using those CLI based text utilities. Otherwise, I'm using VS Code or more of a full IDE, which honestly, even that overlaps somewhat now with the VS Code remote workspaces. Sometimes I'll do that when I'm setting up a Linux box and just open up an entire directory of stuff in VS Code, and it creates the SSH session behind the scenes and lets me go and edit things like I'm actually on the file system with VS Code, which is kind of neat.
Yeah, I think edit is intended to be the lower memory footprint to VS Code. And I want to say in the Microsoft announcement, one of the things that they mentioned is, why would you make edit when VI already exists? And they're like, because so many users get stuck in VI for the first time that they go to use it. They're like, we know it's a meme, but it's a meme because it's real. Like, okay, that's fair.
It is. I mean, there's still Nano.
Well, it is lightweight, and it's really interesting that they actually chose Rust as the language of implementation, which is kind of a departure from the whole C#, F#, .NET paradigm, and it is a lot smaller. So I understand if you're trying to keep things small for a compiled binary, Rust is probably the better tool to reach for there. And they also kind of shocked folks with, I believe, the new TypeScript tooling is built in, was it Go recently?
I don't remember, but
They took kind of an odd language choice for that one as well, and people were like, "Huh, Microsoft is not dogfooding .NET into their tooling." But to me, that's also just a good testament to Microsoft being a lot more open source friendly and more of a polyglot than they used to be. They've I think the Ballmer era, it was so everything was so Microsofty. It was very in a lot of in-house development.
yeah.
Well, you know what's coming next then. You just made me think of it. Rust.net.
Oh Lord.
What would that even look like, though?
I don't know.
I think that might be time for me to hang up my hat and ride into the sunset.
Well, so I'm not sure what that would look like, but I bet you there's somebody at Microsoft thinking about it. Like, well, we've got .NET and we've got Rust. How can we make them work together? And who knows? There might be room there for like start in .NET and then write some routines in Rust and then go back into similar to what you can do with C and Python and a whole bunch of other languages.
You had Visual Basic, and then they went from that to Visual Basic.NET.
Well, it is interesting. A lot of and this is even predates all the open source stuff that Microsoft did with the .NET, but their IL, I guess it's intermediary language that .NET compiles down to. Folks used to do a lot of interesting stuff with IL, and I even saw a project recently from a guy that basically made a C# to C compiler that basically took .NET style C# applications, and he compiled them down to C code with his own sort of interpretive layer that worked on the IL. So, I mean, it's a crazy world we live in right now.
So I will say the first thing that I wanted to do, and I've not finished this yet. I started it and realized I didn't have Rust. The laptop I was using at the time on over the long holiday didn't have Rust installed at all, and I really didn't feel like trying to install it. I was working on other stuff, but my first thought was, I wonder if we can run edit under Linux. It's Rust. You probably can. Of course, the instructions are strictly for doing it on Windows. But so that, again, that's my litmus case for how open source is this. At what point is edit going to be available on Fedora that you can just DNF install it?
Seeing in the GitHub issues, there's a free BSD port available. There you go.
Nice.
Yeah, it'll be coming.
Yeah. So the MIT license, by the way, edit is available under the MIT license. So it is a very, very permissive, not a copyleft, but a very permissive license.
Back to your original question of why are they doing it? I'm gonna guess that it's just somebody's pet project, and they're like, hey, that's cool. Let's put that out there. And Microsoft loves open source. See.
I was kind of thinking that. I feel like this might have literally been a team's pet project. It does not feel like the sort of thing that comes from upper management. Oh, we need a new edit. It feels very much to me like a little group of engineers said, hey, started hacking on it and said, hey, we've got this. Do we want to make it official? And somebody up above said, sure let's throw it out there.
Yeah, and I wonder in this current age of Microsoft kind of open sourcing more projects, they might have initiatives within the corporate structure where they say, hey, if your team has built any really neat tooling that you think would be open source project that we could promote, like that's a good opportunity for Microsoft to generate some social capital, honestly, to say, hey, let's push out some neat stuff for the community to use that doesn't really cut into any of our revenuable interests.
Yeah, I mean, if this was somebody's project, which it probably wasn't too easy for a good developer to get going, look at all the talk it's getting them. Mm-hmm. It's great PR. Cheap, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It appears that it was mainly the work of Leonard Hecker, is the at Microsoft developer, based on GitHub. The at Microsoft developer lives in Germany, by the way, that has 256 commits, and let's see, I had it just a second ago, 45,000 lines of code has added to it. As opposed to the biggest committer has 12 commits and 137 lines of code. So this was pretty much a one-man show.
And that dev is the third top contributor of Microsoft Terminal too. So that makes a lot of sense.
It does. It does. So this is part of their effort to make Windows administratable in the same way that Linux is. That's kind of the direction this is going.
So now that they see how great the PR has been for this, what tools are they going to have next?
Ooh.
Text command line tools. Text-based.
You could see a TUI register editor. Regedit CLI. Ben, what do you want to say? You're thinking about it.
I was going to make a joke about reinventing grep-set awk, but then I realized that they've already done all of this in PowerShell, and everyone hates PowerShell.
It's been done. I don't know. Yeah,
I think they alias some of those even. I think they alias grep for one. I think I want to say in PowerShell. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I know you can ls. They alias a number of the common bash commands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the story I like to tell is Microsoft Windows is like 99% POSIX compliant. basically the only thing that you can't do exactly the same way that keeps it from being POSIX compliant is that fork the fork syscall works a little bit differently, but other than that, it's basically POSIX compliant. And so the fun thing is that all of these tools you can basically already compile under Windows through like what are those called? MSsys, I think. There's a couple of projects that's all about recompiling Linux binaries on Windows. So I guess it's probably the GPL, right? Because a lot of these are GPL. That's why they couldn't just reuse the existing projects. It's that virality idea. Maybe, I don't know. It would be fun to see like the Rust core utils, because I think those are more permissively licensed. Maybe Windows will join Ubuntu and start packaging the Rust core utils in their command lines.
We've been predicting they're going to join Ubuntu for years.
Yeah.
Or more the other way around, I think.
That's one of the other big stories this week is that Ubuntu has come out and said we're gonna ship the Rust core utils. Some other Rust like pseudo Rust, the pseudo RS. They're gonna ship at Ubuntu 25.10, and of course, half the internet's losing their minds over it. I think it's gonna be fun. Things might break, but that's all right. That's what the non-LTS Ubuntu releases are all about.
Yeah, the interim.
Yup. So what do you think? Is Microsoft, is Windows ever going to be based on the Linux kernel?
I could see a path for it, but I'll leave it at that.
I hope so. Someday. I think it makes perfect business sense. They can get their developers focused more on the cloud.
There might be a future where they say we're done developing the NT kernel, and that would be about the only thing that I could see happening. Probably not anytime soon, though. I don't very seriously think that's going to happen, but
it would be interesting if they flipped everything the opposite direction and you were emulating the Windows environment in your new Linux kernel Windows.
Well,
that's something to think about.
A lot of
running wine by Windows.
Probably use Proton, but anyway.
Yeah.
No, a lot of Windows installs these days are actually virtualized. It's the new antivirus thing where there is a little thin hypervisor and the Windows OS runs on top of that. So like I could see like why not open source that hypervisor, or maybe they already have. I don't know. You can make it Linux. You can make it Linux based, or use one of the existing open source hypervisors. So like that idea is not quite as far fetched as it sounds. So
I was going to say the other interesting thing that they open sourced was the Copilot in VS Code. I thought that was that was a pretty big one, because that one to me gets into their bottom line a little bit with selling that. So is the play there to get more democratized developer help there, or what do you think the
I haven't looked really close at what exactly they open sourced, right? Because like, is the LLM model open source, or is it just the glue code?
No, I think it's the Copilot within VS Code, so it's like all the tooling around it. So they still have all the stuff there where you can interface with external. Was it MCPs? I can't remember.
Yeah, that's
all the terminology.
That is the Tron-inspired agentic AI interface thing. Yes.
I was going to say, that path you're going of Windows being somewhat virtualized on top of Linux. I could see, maybe a third party. There was a program I used to use way back in the early 2000s. It stopped, I think, sometime in the late 2000s before 2010, but it was called Win for Lin. And it somewhat integrated Windows and Linux, and like you could actually run Windows on top. Back then you could have like just an X session. I mean, it was easy to do, and then run applications on it. You could run Windows on that X session. It was like Windows XP at that time, I suppose. And I would have like an Alt F1 being my Linux desktop, Alt F2 would be my Windows one, and it worked really well actually. I was really sad when they discontinued that, but somebody could come along and do something again like that and make it even better, and it could function like your Vision.
I mean, you kind of just described VMware and VirtualBox and all the rest of running Windows inside a virtual machine.
Yeah, I guess you can already run using WinApps, I think is it called. So you can, Windows is virtualized, but then you can run individual applications right on your Linux desktop.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, the QEMU stuff has opened up a lot of doors there.
Mm-hmm.
As you were talking about that, I was recalling installing PC Linux OS when I was back in college.
Yup.
That was a short tenure.
my drug of choice to mess around with at college was one of the early Fedoras, and I would have, of course, virtualized Windows inside of that. I had a machine that was just new enough to be able to do that, and this was back in the day when what was it, Compass Fusion, I think is what it was called, on KDE. The fancy, and they've got it back, but like the fancy desktops on the Cube and all that. And
yeah, the 3D desktop. I remember this.
So
yes.
what I would do is I would have the 3D desktops on the Cube and have a Windows VM on one face of the Cube, so you have a keyboard shortcut to switch back and forth between your Windows desktop and your Linux desktop. And I thought that was pretty hot stuff back, in 2006. 20 years ago. Oh, college was 20 years ago. I feel old. Thanks, guys. So what do we think is next? The Copilot thing is interesting. I wonder how long it's going to take for someone to come along and say, well, let's connect a different AI to VS Code instead of the actual Microsoft Copilot. Let's have our own version of Copilot that's run by ChatGPT or something else.
Well, they already let you do some choosing of the different models within the Copilot currently, so you can choose between like Claude or Gemini or a couple of different GPT versions. So they already have some of that, but I do wonder if like open sourcing that extension will make it easier on third-party LLM engines to integrate, and so you might end up with some community forks at the very least, where some of these vendors say like, hey, download our if you want to use our AI agent, you just download our platform's VS Code plugin, and it works and behaves just like Copilot, but it's ours. I also wonder about, because Copilot has such like a deep level of integration within VS Code right now, what that would even look like. Would third-party ones have the same level of access to VS Code's skinning and everything? I mean, that seems like that might be asking for trouble.
Copilot is also, it's been explicitly trained on source code. Right, I have to imagine that most of the other LLMs are not going to do as well as Copilot does with looking at code, because it's honestly fairly impressive, right, Ben? We've found this. It's caught our mistakes before, like, hey, you're using an int to represent system load, but system load is a decimal. It's measured in 1/100th. You might want to think about this. Like, I might want to think about that. You're right.
Yeah, the review platform on GitHub for Copilot is really, really impressive at catching stupid mistakes.
Yeah, and so like it's the same thing as all the rest of AI is right now. You can't trust it, but it is exceptional at finding things that are just a little bit outside of the norm. And
explaining some things too, I would say, in the Copilot review thing. I found the summaries to be helpful, where it says kind of what we did to this file, and to at least give me a gut check of like, did I actually, do I agree with that assessment?
Right,
Yeah, I mean,
right.
There's been times that like I've had an error in how I was typing in a command. I'm like, what am I doing wrong? And I copy it and put it in there, and it says, I'm like, what am I doing wrong? What's the right way? And it spits out the right way, and then it explains. It's like, dash A does this, dash B does this does that, and then we're doing this and that. It's like, oh, okay. And you got to double check it because it's not gonna always be right, but it's accurate way more than I don't know. It's very often accurate.
Yeah, so in that case, it's basically parsing the man file for you,
Yeah,
which is useful.
so much quicker because
Yeah.
I hate reading man files.
They can be a little long at times. Yes. One of the stories that I covered this week or last week on the security column was, I forget her name. She works for DARPA, and she was looking at the SSH pre-authentication vulnerability that sort of didn't happen about a year ago because it got caught right after they minted a release, and none of the big distros had picked up the release yet. So, we kind of all dodged a bullet with that. And at the time, people like Tavis Ormandy, who's one of the big Google security guys, came out and said, I really don't think this is would actually be exploitable to get RCE. And so this DARPA researcher looks at it and goes, no, I think there probably is a way to do this. But then she goes, nobody is actually using this anymore, and I value my sanity too much to actually write the exploit. And so that's where the talk could have ended, but then she pivoted and said, so then I asked these 3 different AIs to take a look at this, see if they could understand the vulnerability, and then to write an exploit. And it was quite funny to hear her talk about it. And the point to all this is when she actually got to the point of asking the AI to write code, it would give her pages and pages of Python code that didn't do anything. It was literally useless, right? Like it looked good, but when you actually tried to run it, it was just nonsense. And that's still kind of where we're at, particularly with getting AI to write code on its own. It's just not there yet. It doesn't understand it well enough yet.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask. I might ask it, like, how do I do, like, a tiny little bit of code or something, but I'm not going to ask it to write me an entire function or program for me. But, like, what I had this week is I was playing around with the DD client to try to set dynamic DNS, but setting the DNS like in Cloudflare. So I was linking to Cloudflare, so to see if I could like host things on my DHCP at home and just have it without having one of those other odd dynamic DNS servers. But anyway, I was getting errors, and I was not able to find the answers. I was getting close, just from Google searching, but I was able to, in combination with my Google searches and AI, I was able to get it to work.
Yeah, not using the Google AI though, right?
Right.
Yeah, so when you Google search, you get the Google AI answer, and it's hilarious how many times that will tell you the exact opposite of what the actual articles will tell you.
This is a Microsoft show today, and so therefore I was using Copilot.
Yeah, Copilot and Bing told you the wrong answer.
Have they integrated Copilot into Bing?
Oh, yes.
That seems like
prominently.
A thing. It seems like a thing they would do, yeah.
Oh, yeah, they were before Google.
So we can't talk about Microsoft and AI without broaching the recall topic. I assume you guys are familiar with this. What do you think?
No screenshots, please.
No screenshots, please.
It makes sense why they did it that way. I mean, if I'm looking for the MVP solution to this, I mean, from a development perspective, it makes sense why they did it. It just has so many problems.
Did you hear what Signal did in response to this?
Yeah, they like blocked the access, right? It blacks out the screen or something. I read.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. No, the funny part is how they did it. They set the flag that said our content is DRM'd. Signal is now a DRM application, and Microsoft's like, oh no, we don't want any of that. So the take on that I thought was the best is that, DRM has been such a force of, it may be a tiny stretch to say evil, so it has been such an obnoxious force in the world for so many years. It is nice that it is finally, serving the consumers for once.
It's having its hero arc right
yes. DRM's hero arc. I wish I thought of that. That would have been a great title for the column last week, but oh well.
But I think I've kind of said it before in the past on other shows, but I think it's an interesting technology, and I think there could be use cases on, a machine that's used for, I don't know, specific work cases, and, it might be useful. It definitely could be useful, but because of the obvious privacy security concerns, it definitely should not be a on by default thing.
It is not, right?
It's not anymore. No.
Yeah, no, I was actually reasonably impressed with the way Microsoft cleaned up recall. It's not on by default. They did a couple of other things. So they're actually they're basically shipping the parts of Copilot that you need to be able to do on device processing, and so they're not shipping your screenshots anywhere. They actually went in and properly encrypted them. It's off by default. So all the things that people asked them to do, Microsoft kind of did with recall. And so from the privacy perspective and all of that, it is much less problematic. What Microsoft really still has not addressed, I don't think, with recall is the ick factor of, wait, what do you, my computer is taking screenshots every few seconds? Yeah. It kind of hits people in the ick factor. It grosses them out. And you never want a product to do that. It is the last thing Microsoft wants, is for Windows to gross people out. That's a game ender.
I wonder if I could turn that on for video gaming, and then who was that who got me in that FPS game last week? I need to get him. And then they'll give me the name. This person got you.
Oh, that's funny. Maybe.
You can carry out your vengeance.
Who are all my targets this week?
Oh,
Copilot.
The irony is not lost that they called the product recall. I mean, it's really
indeed.
Once again, bash Windows style. We're
bash on Windows.
They've taken a misstep with their self-fulfilling prophecy naming conventions.
Yes. Is it better or worse than the naming conventions from the latest iteration of AMD's laptop CPUs or the USB consortium? Those two are terrible at naming for other reasons.
Yeah, those are a lot different reasons, just because they mean nothing at all. So, I mean, they have meaning, but
yeah,
you read them and you don't get anything from it.
Yes.
Are we eventually approaching just pharmaceutical tier naming with the software projects, where we're just gonna have these nonsense?
I mean, aren't we kind of already there?
Yeah, I think we are in some cases.
I mean, project names are like emails. All the good ones are taken.
It's true.
You do see some creativity. It's easy to take the creativity too far and end up with unfortunate names. I heard one earlier today. I'm not going to repeat it, but I heard one earlier today that it's like, what made you think this was a good idea? No, that one in particular was legally not going to be okay because of trademarks. But yeah, there's some crazy stuff.
Sometimes language barrier will get you to if it's a project that started in a particular locale and just does not translate into certain languages very, very nicely.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
true.
hard to avoid though without. Maybe you should ask your AI.
Ask an AI.
Project. Yeah. Is this going to cause any problems?
Yeah. So somebody on this show actually had the advice of whenever you go to pick a name, Google for that name first, and ask yourself, am I going to be able to show up in the front page of results with this name, right? And so we had a project we interviewed that was called Scarf. And it's like trying to find that project on the Googles was so hard. Because
you got to beat Nordstrom.
Google wanted to sell me scarves. Google was all about selling me all the scarves. It's like, no, I want the open source project. Here's scarves that open source projects like to wear. It was bad.
That's not good naming either.
Yes. So there's a sweet spot right in the middle between.
Whenever I've named something, the first thing I do is I look if there's a domain, if the domain is taken, and then I also, Google it.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. So what do we think is next for Microsoft? What are they going to open source next? What's left?
Windows Media Center. No.
Oh, I know some people would love
here's
to have
some
seen
legacy.
that.
Here's some legacy fun for you guys.
When they
short
announced
story.
When they announced Edit. So first off, when they announced Edit, I thought it was the old DOS Edit. I was like, oh, interesting. That'll be fun. And it's a new one.
Now, short story on the Windows Media Center. I, in my days of doing like IT support, like residential stuff, kind of Geek Squad style, I remember working with a customer who was running Windows 7 and not upgrading because he loved Windows Media Center and I don't know, used it all the time, and his video card failed, and for whatever reason, after I put a new video card, I could not get Windows Media Center to work again. It was a very sad day for him.
Yeah.
So if they could only open source that for him, he might be a happy guy again. Though I don't know if he's around. That was quite a while ago.
Yeah. I like the fact that so many of these companies, Microsoft is doing it to some extent. They'll take some stuff from their old back catalog and make it open source. And then developers can go in there and make it run on new places. And so you get very fun, very crazy and oddball stuff like running Windows Media Center on Linux. And it's fun. I love that they're doing it. Like there's no downside to a company doing that. So long as the code base is clean and it's not our NDA, like all that legal stuff, that can be a problem. And then of course you have people like Winamp that try to do it and it just blows up in their face. Don't do what Winamp did, I suppose.
I know, I got it. Here is what they got to open source next. Solitaire.
They're not shipping it anymore. It doesn't exist anymore. Not with Windows.
Throw so Minesweeper in there too.
Yeah. Is Minesweeper not already open sourced?
It might be.
It almost seems like it is. I mean, there's a billion clones of it.
You almost don't have to.
I find it ironic when they open source all this old legacy software onto GitHub and people just start immediately filing issues. Like, come on, guys.
I don't know which is more fun, the filing of issues, some of which are nonsense, or the fact that people will immediately jump in and start fixing things. That is hilarious and delightful to me. That 30-year-old code base, and you'll get a pull request. I noticed a typo here. Let's fix it. It's so much fun. We nerds are unique. I guess
that's pretty nerdy.
Yes, it is. It's fun though. I like seeing it. I would love to see more of it. Even the old game engines, people releasing the old game engines and then people porting them, making them work in different places. It's a blast. All right. Is there anything else we need to talk about? We've gone for about an hour, and that is the show length. Anything else pressing? Anything you guys want to plug?
If you want to check out my open source work, github.com/thebintern, and I mostly work on the Meshtastic project. So if you like off-grid tech, LoRa, IoT devices, any of that stuff interests you, check out meshtastic.org.
Yeah, very cool. Rob?
And if you want to check me out, you can go to robertpcampbell.com, and I got links to all my social media there.
Yeah. All right, I appreciate you guys being here, jumping in at the last minute, and it's been fun. We've kind of reminisced and talked Microsoft and open source and licensing. It's been a blast. Thank you guys.
Thanks.
Yep.
See you guys.
All right. If you want more of me, there's, of course, Hack-A-Day. You can find my security column, which we referenced a time or two. You can find the occasional oddball article I do there otherwise, although these days it's mostly the security column and Floss Weekly that keeps me busy. And then over at twit.tv, we have the Untitled Linux Show, which is where Rob hails from. That is twit.tv/ULS, which is also a blast, and you should check it out. We appreciate everybody that watches and listens, both those live and that get us on the download, and we will be back. We'll see you next week on Floss Weekly.